Hello and welcome. I'm Sylvain Bergeron, educator with BERNINA of America, and today we're doing an all questions webinar. So we opened the questions period a couple of weeks ago, and we've received, I have 15 pages of questions, so I'll try to get to as many as I can today, and we will be taking questions that are being submitted as we proceed within this hour. We have an hour, so we'll cover as much material as possible. A couple of things. A lot of the questions were how would you do this, that kind of project. That really is a class or a tutorial. So I will point out some resources where you may find information that is of interest to you. Otherwise, if you really want to use your machine, my standard advice has always been talk to your local store, find out where their classes are, and using your machine in a class, making a project that has the techniques, that involves the techniques you're interested in, is the best way to both master your machine and, of course, learn the techniques and be able to do the projects. So without further ado, I have my eager assistant, Emily, today, who's my guardian angel. She will be feeding me the questions that are coming on the line, and I have printed out the ones that arrived ahead. So I'm going to jump in, use the time to the best effect. First question from Karen, and by the way, we have questions from the US, Australia, Canada, and the UK as well. So we'll be doing a little tour along the way. So Karen has a question for overlockers. When using a serger to construct your garment, how do you make sure you have a 5/8 seam allowance, when you line up your seam? So two things. Your presser foot on a BERNINA overlocker, since the beginning, would have the ridges on the presser foot on the front of the toes that mark where the needles are. So if you're using a left needle or a 5-thread with a chain stitch on the far left, those are marked for you. You can use a seam gauge, little metal seam gauges that have the slider, and then set that to 5/8, and then go to the right. And the current overlockers, the 4 and 8 series L overlockers, and even the previous ones, have a right seam guide that you can attach to your machine and position the slider in to help you guide the fabric for cutting. So that would make it easier. If you don't have access to a seam guide for some reason, you could use your seam gauge, and then where the cutter cover is, that curved cutter cover in behind the blade, you could actually mark it right there on the serger. It has to do with your cutting width. So you have to be careful that it's all set to the right settings before you mark. But a right seam guide with the grooves on the presser foot work together to guarantee a seam allowance on an overlocker. Next question, on a 570 QE, it's from Geraldine in the US. Is there a way to wind a bobbin without unthreading the needle? For instance, if you do embroidery, right? You may have the same thread in the bobbin and you just want to reload or load one ahead so that you don't have downtime. I do this. So best option, which I have in my sewing room, is the multiple spool holder. That thread stand with an antenna if you want, and 4 thread guides. You could have your bobbin thread on there. By the time you pull the thread up and it comes back down, you could actually go through on the top of your machine. You have your bobbin winder right here. The little metal clip is on top of the machine, right behind it. And then you have the little metal pretension stud, the one that you go around in a clockwise fashion to cross a thread over before you go to the bobbin, right? That you could have the thread come down the multiple spool holder, go through that clip right into the pretension stud, not having to go through the first guide on the back of the machine. Therefore, you could keep the machine threaded. If you don't have a multiple thread holder, I have one for every machine in my sewing room. You can have just one. There are adaptive plates that you can port it from machine to machine if you want to. It's the best thing, especially if you do embroidery. If you don't have one, you could use an individual thread stand near the back of your machine and pipe the thread right through that little guide off the thread stand, those tall ones, and then go right through the pretension stud. So yes, you can wind bobbins while your machine stays threaded for sewing. Evie Kinsley asked a bit of a Herculean task. We'll see about that. Could you show the setup of the embroidery module for the 770 QE and some edge to edge? Okay, here's what you'll want to do. This is a class, okay? So we don't have time for that today, but let me point you in the right direction. Let's go to the computer, and I'm going to go to Facebook, BERNINA USA, and the network is being slow. Come on. It's not going. Oh, there you go. So when you go to Facebook, BERNINA USA, if you want to do edge-to-edge quilting with the embroidery hoop, then what you want to do is go through the More tab here. You can go to the videos. And then you'll see that there's about, oh, by the way, if you have questions on BSR, we had several questions on, you have tips and pointers for BSR. I've done a couple of videos so far, and we have one combined video that will cover all the modes and all of that coming up. So you'll find this on Facebook, Bernina USA. And then there is here a playlist of computerized quilting with Bernina that my colleague, Connie Fanders, who is our coordinator for embroidery, has done so far 7 different videos on edge-to-edge quilting and computerized quilting, which is in the hoop quilting. So you'll want to make sure you go there, and that will give you a whole bunch of information from how to set up your machine, how to hoop the hoop, efficiency methods, all that. So Connie's our expert there, and she has done a great job covering the topic. Okay, let's go back to the cam. Okay, Ellen is asking, any ideas why my 880 Plus often gives me the spool thread, the needle thread error on starting up? There's basically one thing that causes this, is when you start sewing, even if you use the thread cutter or not, you have a thread tail underneath the needle thread. There's a length about this much past the needle. If you start sewing off the fabric, then that thread is free to be grabbed by the hook and be spooled under, and it will whip. It's not long enough to go around the full hook rotation, but it will get whipped around, and then who knows what will happen. And if you speed up really fast, your Bernina can go to just about 1,000 stitches a minute in about a second, okay? So that would cause that thread to whack around underneath. That's a technical term, and there's no control over that thread. So that's when it will kind of, floss around and get bunched into the first real stitch once you reach the fabric. To avoid that, we always say start right at the edge on the fabric. You don't need that first stitch at the very edge. Typically, your cross seam is 1/2 inch, 3/8 or 5/8 in. That first stitch can be right at the edge of the fabric. Otherwise, you hold your threads. I'm old school. I grew up before thread cutters. I use the thread cutters today, but if I do anything decorative, or if I do anything that is quilting on the sandwich, and if I do precision stitching, top stitching, edge stitching, stuff like that, I just I use the cutter on the outside of the machine, and then I hold my tails when I start. That never fails, especially for decorative work. Then you can use when you start, you can use the needle up and down button to bring the thread up, and then you start stitching from there. But I always start stitching on the fabric. I don't need a lead. I don't need a scrap patch. I just either hold my threads, and for me, holding threads is a finger on the thread. Otherwise, if you use the cutter on the outside of the machine, it will hold the thread for you. That way, when you start, your thread is not loose and it will just go. So remember, a loose thread is ungoverned, and the steel hook will always have its fun with it. So you start on the fabric, anchors both threads, not at the, lock the first stitch, and then that tail just stays behind. So you have 2 good options there. Okay, Ellen from the US is asking, no, that we just answered that one. Renee is asking, Bernina 480, does it require the red bobbin for bobbin work? Require? No. Much preferable? Yes. So if you use the regular bobbin case for bobbin work, you would bypass going under the slit and all that. You would put the bobbin in, and you would just pull the thread straight out of the hole. The problem there is that if it's a ribbon, for instance, because that opening, there's a lot going on with a regular bobbin case, the ribbon is subject to folding on itself. So the red bobbin case does not have the tension. It has no tension. It does not have that tension assembly that you're not using for bobbin work that you would want to bypass. So you don't have to bypass and risk folding wider trims like ribbons. You just put it in, poke it through, and you get beautiful results that way. Now, if you want to do bobbin work with just thicker threads and yarns, you could use a conventional, and I'm not saying the regular bobbin case, the one that came with your machine from the factory. You don't want to mess with that tension. That's your calibration. That means that for most average threads, this bobbin case will work well for you. So you could get a second bobbin case that you can play with the screw, loosen the tension on it. If you use a lot of thick yarns or threads all the time, you could have one calibrated specifically for that. But if it's really thick stuff and ribbons, the red one is the way to go. Okay, Emily, do we have questions coming in on the line? Yeah, sure, let's do that. Okay. Okay, I'll do another one while you figure. Are we there?
Hello? Okay, sorry,
Okay.
everybody. Okay, let's see. You might need a simulator for this one. Deborah wants to know, how do I get my 880 to cut jump stitches?
Oh, okay. All right. So for the 880 and well, all the 590, 790, 880, and the 500 and 700, all the full embroidery machines, right? There is a setting in your embroidery, and that would be right here. Let me go there. I'm going to go to the 880. I have a lot of simulators. There it is. So when I load the simulator, in the settings, in embroidery, you want to go to the thread cutter. You'll want to make sure that these two have to do with between colors and when you start embroidery. This last one, by default, is set to 6 millimeters, a quarter inch. And that means this is the jump stitch trigger. If anything is a quarter inch or longer, it will trim it. Now, if you bring this down to 1 millimeter, which is tiny, then even between letters in lettering, it will cut the thread. It will be able to trim it. You want to combine this with another embroidery setting, which is the thread away. It's on by default. Make sure thread away is on. So if you have a very small, even jump stitch, the machine will trim it, pull the thread tail loose, come back, re-enter, pull the thread under, and then make the next letter or the next object. It will be super clean. So these are the two settings in embroidery, which are thread away and the last setting in the cutter. Okay. Next, I have a question here. Well, actually, Emily, give me another.
Okay. Teresa, when using the wing needle to do a hem stitch, my thread bunches up at the bottom and the thread breaks. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, when you do hem stitching, you are severely disrupting your fabric, right? That wing needle has two wedges. They don't cut. They're just like bouncers, and they force a hole open. A normal needle pokes through the fabric and displaces the fibers a little bit. No, this one is shoving fibers. And then the thread with the proper tension will, between the stitches, will keep those holes, those big holes, open because it's basically pulling them apart, keeping them open. You will want to hold your threads when you start, period, with hem stitching, because again, you're shoving fabric. And then, the tension will help. If you're creating a trim, like an insertion, you may want to have a little lead where you start, all the tension will balance out, because hem stitching with a wing needle is distorted stitching. It's not, it goes against all the golden rules of stitch formation, right? You want as small a needle as possible. You want just as much tension as possible normally, as fine a thread as you can use. And then with hem stitching, you're kind of violating this. You're taking a very vulnerable fabric, which is lightweight, so a very, not loose, but not a very dense weave, and you're shoving the fibers apart, and now you're putting tension on the thread to pull those open. So give yourself a little lead time. If you could just start with a piece that's a little longer at the start, or practice your settings on a scrap, on a sample. And then once those work well, now you will start your fabric if you can, right? Or start your sizing, because that will give you cleaner results. With a wing needle, you have to use a wider stitch plate, right? You can't use a straight stitch plate. So if it's a narrow stitch, maybe a 5.5, typically we'll use the 9 if we want a nice big hem stitch, but that means that the fabric is prone to distortion. So if you starch it, it will prevent the fabric from going down into that big opening as it's being shoved by the bouncer needle, basically. So that would be for that. If you hold your threads when you start, you should not have issues once you are started. Okay, I have a 790 question. Can the 790 be updated to the BERNINA 790 Plus? Yes. Now, we had this upgrade about 4 years ago, I want to say 3 to 4 years ago. And I had to write the blog post on what the new features were. And mostly the new features are embroidery, and they are totally worth it. Pinpoint placement, grouping, ungrouping, a whole bunch of good stuff. So controlling the jump cut length and all that. So it was offline for a while. Well, the factory has reissued codes, upgrade codes, so you can now purchase them. The original upgrade came in a box with, for instance, the MIDI hoop as a piece of hardware. Currently, it will be just the upgrade code without the MIDI hoop, so the price will reflect that. You can still, because a lot of people have the MIDI hoop at this point. So yes, you can upgrade your 790 today. We have back in stock if you want the upgrade codes, so your local store can help you procure that. And I would, if you do embroidery at all, you're doing yourself a favor. It's the features that have been added are totally worth it. Lois is asking, can we stop the hover function 100%? So yes, to change the hover 100%. Let me go to the simulator again. And I'm going to go back to, and it's the same on all the machines that hover. So I'm going to go back to the 880, but it's not just on the 880. So when you go to this will be in the settings. So when you go to the settings, and all the machines that have hover will have the same setting. It's a sewing thing, right? The hover is in sewing. The hover is it's tied with one of the buttons. So you'll want to go to the hand with the buttons. And it only works when the needle down function is in action, right? If you don't invoke needle down function, your machine will not hover because something needs to stay on the fabric. So if the needle is down stabbing that project, then the machine can afford to lift the foot when you stop sewing. Make sense? So if you go to the needle down, this does not change your needle down function that is on your sewing screen. This is just labeled this way to tell you that this applies only when the needle is set to down. When you go there, you have 3 hover options. There's no hover at all. There's hover, and there is all the way up hover. So there's controllable hover, how much do you want, and hover all the way up. I've used it all the way up when I was sewing patches, logos. I was helping a friend with horse saddle pads. It's kind of a high loft batting between 2 layers of fabric. It's denser than batting, but it's about it's over half an inch thick. So I reduced my pressure with pressure. I was using a straight stitch foot number 8D. And when it was time to pivot corners, I had my hover all the way up because basically I needed to clear that big project. So let me go back to simulator. I'm going to give you a couple of tidbits. If you have, so this hover here is adjustable, and I will do that in a minute. This is if you want no hover. I am old school. I grew up on BERNINAs, mechanical BERNINAs from the 70s, and then the first computerized, like the 1230, for instance. So I grew up with a freehand system. The freehand system is hover on demand, as much or little as you want when you want it. And my brain is programmed to this. I drive a manual transmission. My left leg does the same thing in the car. So my brain is just wired this way. This is the way I do hover most of the time. If I do a lot of pivoting work though, and my colleagues, most of my colleagues who grew up with the current generation of BERNINAs, like the hover, they typically use the middle option. So if you use the middle option, there's another setting. They did not put it on the same screen because they wanted the animation to be big enough to be obvious, especially on the smaller screen. So you'll go back to the hand with the buttons, backtrack one node, and then you go here to the foot height. This foot height is basically determining the height of your hover. And here's where I have a little tidbit for you. 2 millimeters work pretty well on the 7 and 8 series. I tend to put mine at 3. And actually, while on 3 millimeters, which is 1/8 of an inch, on the 5 series, most of the educators have come to the conclusion that on the 5 series, it works a little better if you pop it up to 3. If you're doing a thick project, you can pop it up to, all the way. If you do a very thin project, you need barely a hint of a hover, you can bring it down. You have complete control, you can change it at any time. If you want to reset it, you just touch the number and it goes back. So the second setting is here. On the bottom right is where you select what type of hover you want. And if you choose the adjustable hover, that will be how do you adjust the height of the foot when it hovers. That will be here, okay? So let's go back to the face cam. Okay, related to the last question. Can you purchase the upgrade for to plus your 880? So yes, that's the same upgrade as for the 790 plus. So again, you'll want to talk to your local store. They will be able to help you procure that. That was a question from Sandra. Sherry asked, can you use feet from the 790 on the 480? Oh yeah. The 480 is, and if you're looking to the 4 series, I always say I love the 480 because it takes all the same feet. It is a 9 millimeter feet dog. So everything that the C feet from the 7 and 8 series would work the same on it. So it's a great machine if you want a travel size machine or a classroom an easier, more portable machine. The only thing the 4 series does not have is the dual feed. So you would not use your D feet on it, because remember, D feet have a cutout at the back. If you don't have dual feed, that foot is missing a chunk. It won't work as well as a C foot in that case. So the 480, the C feet would work better for the equivalent application. But the C feet will work on the 7 or 8 series. So you're well covered there. So that was great. Next question we had from Marie was, can you discuss the features in the 770 upgrade? So 770 upgraded the embroidery features where you got pinpoint placement, stuff like that. You have BSR that's been upgraded and now has a mode 3. It even has the foot control, where the heel kick, the back kick spot is, that you can use this to just trigger the machine on and off as an on-off switch. That is a feature borrowed from the Q series sit down. So, and then the upgrade makes the machine compatible with the new SDT, Smart Drive Technology module, which for especially the maxi hoop, would speed up the embroidery. You can run embroidery now at full speed pretty much on the maxi hoop, up to 55% faster. On the smaller hoops, like small and medium, you won't notice that much of a difference. But I have to tell you, Emily's in the room with me today. I was running on a jumbo hoop, that's on an 8 series, but still, I was running a triple stitch sashiko type design that on the bottom right of one of those hoops with a twist lock, where the machine typically would slow down, and the machine kept at full rabbit going like crazy, and the stitch was perfect. And we geeked out like children on Christmas with a new toy. We could not believe how fast that was. So to upgrade your BSR, to upgrade your embroidery features, and to give you an open door to upgraded embroidery speed and all that, the 770 upgrade is definitely worth it. You'll want to talk to your local store. There have been promotions on the upgrade so far, so make sure you don't miss out on it. Okay, Brenda is asking, does the walking foot need to be serviced? The favorite answer is depends. Think of it as it's a serviceable foot. So if you use it a lot, I've known people who piece quilts with it. They do, they will do 100,000 miles a year on their walking foot. Recently, somebody told me that it became noisy after like 5 or 10 years. So if it becomes noisy, if you think it may need servicing, when you next have your machine cleaned up, the clean, oil, and adjust, the basic service every year. We're good about that, right? Every year. Then include the walking foot, leave a note for your tech. They will open it, they will clean it, oil it, make sure that it's performing up to par. Your walking foot it was not inexpensive. It is a premium performing piece of equipment, and it is serviceable. So if you haven't done it in several years, have your tech check it. It doesn't take long. If they say it's fine, then they don't have to do anything but a couple of drops of oil. But that's what the annual service is good for. People say I don't like to take my car to the oil change because I always find something wrong with it. And my techs at the local place laugh because I want them to find that my this or that needs servicing before I break down on the highway, right? So they will find the little things, and your walking foot is serviceable. Take advantage of that. Another question: do you need a walking foot with a 570 QE? Not most of the time, but in some applications, definitely. I say it every time. It's a question we get a lot, and I'm glad we get the question because it needs answering. The dual feed that is on the 570 QE is 5 times the convenience, right? You slide your hand on the back of the machine. You don't need to do anything. Just slide your hand. It's on. You put a D foot on. You do that. You're in business. But when you get to something heavy, like a full-size quilt or putting on a binding, then it's a limited area. The walking foot is 5 times the surface area, just about. So it's 5 times the performance. Not only that, dual feet is in the middle of the back. It's after the stitching, right? It's behind the stitching. Walking foot has these 2 pads that the stitching point is here, but the pads go all the way up here. So the pads are grabbing your project before the stitching, bringing it to the needle, and then back out of there. So it's controlling everything before, during, and after stitching. And if you want to do binding, where you have like your 3 layers, and now here you have like your 3 layers plus 3 more, or at least 2 more. So you now have 5, 6, 7 layers here. They're going to be slightly offset. The dual feed may cause, may run off of that because it doesn't have the surface area to control 2 different sandwiches. So the walking foot doesn't care. If you line this up, one pad is on the binding, one is on the quilt, and they're both going, which means that when you put your binding on, you won't get this little shearing effect that can happen. If a foot drags, there's more layers that are softer on the binding. They may drag and lag against the foot, and then you get that little bit of a diagonal ripple, and you wonder what happened to that. So walking foot, those don't happen because everything is controlled evenly on both sides. So that's my answer is yes, totally. For me, my walking foot is about 5% of the time, but when I'm ready to finish one of my wall quilts, stitch in the ditch, binding and all that, it's 100% walking foot for that last stage of the project. So the last 25 hours of an art quilt for me is strictly walking foot. So I would not be without it. Okay. Do we have more questions coming in, Emily? Yes.
Okay. Let's see. We did have a question. Okay, from Linda. I have an 830. There is a trade-in deal from BERNINA going on. Can you share some of the benefits to trading in for a newer BERNINA?
Okay, yes. So on the plus side, what you know about all your muscle memories about your 830, you know how to put the feet on, threading it and all that will be the same. It's an 8 series, right? The stitch library has been increased. What I like the best, and I have an 830, my personal machine at home. I call it my beauty and my beast. I love that machine. I have an 880 on loan from work as my work machine, right? So when I first went to the 880, I was like, whoa, where is everything? But that's new. It's like you move to a new house, where are the knives in the drawers, right? So when I go back to my 830 today, because I use the 880 mostly, I can see the difference. There are more stitches, things are better organized. All the functions are now, and there are more functions. All the functions are organized in panels. There are new functions available. So the box of crayons got bigger. The embroidery is far superior. You have pinpoint placement. You have all the control over the jump stitch. You have a lot more features in embroidery. On the sewing side, you still have your dual feed. All that stuff is very similar. The functions are just better organized. The core of what you know will still be there, but everything has been multiplied. Basically, there's more alphabets, there's more decorative stitches. The personal program is there with 4 folders. The history is there as well. The combi mode is a lot simpler, and it's a lot easier. When you combine stitches now, you can read them sideways as you plot them in. It's a lot easier. There's a stitch designer. You can edit built-in stitches. You want to take a regular blanket stitch, and you want to make the little teeth, if you want, on the comb, you want them to go at 45 degrees. You can now do that just by editing the stitch. There is the best thing you could do is go to a local store and have them give you a tour. You'll know what's not on your machine, because when you see something new on the screen the machine doesn't do, and then you'll be able to jot down, what really is useful to you and make the decision from there. It's been, frankly, it's been a popular upgrade, which, I have an 830 and it says, it's just like a pro. You always ask yourself, do I need this? And then look at it. I look at it as a box of crayons. Will it do more for me, for my creative space? And the 880 definitely does. There were years of feedback that went into it. The creative consultant, there's one even in embroidery. There's a bunch of features in there that you can take advantage of. So it's basically go to the local store, have them show it to you. Showing is the best way to explore and take a walk in the park if you want. So have fun with that. Okay, next question. I have some here. Does BERNINA plan to develop the new, faster smart embroidery module for the 590? Well, let's go here. So there is one already. There's an SDT module for the 5 series. At this time, it is only available for the 590, the Crystal Edition. That's the star of the show. That's the one that launched it. But that means that down the road, it will trickle out and it will be available as an upgrade for, I don't know when. What you want to do, and I may be repeating myself, is because I believe in this. Talk to your local store, tell them, I'm interested in looking at this when it becomes available. If they have a 590 Crystal at the store, you can go look right away what it does. It will show you. But then and the question also was asked, will there be a promotion to trade in? I do not know. I don't make the promotions. I see them maybe a week or two before you see them. So if that becomes the case, your store can call you in and let you know, by the way, we got a new module and it's on sale, whatever. Make sure you're in touch with the local store, because that is where the information will come through when the module arrives and when it's available for general purchase. Okay, but yeah, it is here. It's available. It is smoother. They've done some of the same work inside that they did for the 7 and 8 series modules. Okay, let me see here. There was a question here about. Okay, does one need to clean or maintain the gathering foot number 16 to consistently gather the same fabric at the same stitch length? Nope. I mean, it should not need maintenance. You know, the fabric just glides under and through it. So if you see something sticky, whatever, because you use a specific fabric, yeah, you could clean it up. A little rubbing alcohol, but I've never had to clean one. One thing though, when you gather fabric, the same fabric, same stitch, same thread, same needle, right? But I know why, here in Illinois, in January, when the furnace is running in the house, that fabric is very dry. It will tuck very, very hard and very crisply. In July, it's muggy. It gets very humid here. My doors, my windows are open. I don't like the AC so much. So my fabric will be a little floppy because it's softer, because it's more humid. It will stretch more easily at that point than it would in January. It may not gather as well. So the variable here is pretty much the humidity. So if you want to do this, you want to gather your fabric, always test a piece. Run, like, I mark like a couple of feet on a strip, on a scrap. And then I will run the setting I think is what I want to use for that fabric. Thread tension 9, right? My stitch length 3 and above, and then run it under the foot. And if it, then I will measure the gathered piece. If it's not what I wanted, I could lengthen the stitch a little bit. I could increase the tension a little bit within measure, and then rerun the sample. That testing is the only way to make sure. So all things do not stay equal. And if you gather in the summer in let's say in the desert in the Southwest in Phoenix, and then you go to Florida, take a class, it will be a completely different environment. Again, the humidity will affect the flexibility of that fabric and therefore the gathering ratios. Okay, all right. So that's for gathering. I love the gathering foot, by the way. And if you have an overlocker, you need to check the gathering foot for your overlocker. It is a marvel. It is even more efficient than gathering at the sewing machine. Okay. Okay. Does the foot controller, the foot control, need to be disconnected from the machine when you do embroidery? No, you can embroider with the foot control. I just taught a class last week where I showed people how when you want to baste, in the embroidery, if you use the basting function, sometimes it's because you're floating a project. Let's say your project is the back of a jeans jacket. You have this big seam you want to stitch on, and this is kind of floppy. You may have to swing a leaf out of the way. You may have to flop a pocket flap. You may have to make sure the collar doesn't fall down if you're doing something on the yoke. So your hands are going to be there. I use the foot control. And then I can baste at slow speed without, because if you have your speed left too fast, the machine will baste at reduced speed anyway, but not your speed, its speed, right? So I go with the foot control, and if you say, oh, I need to stop, you just release the foot, flop the collar, then resume with your foot control, and you can manually embroider that way. You want to stop in the middle of a design, not where the machine plans on stopping, but you want to stop after this part of the bird and you want to do something else after. You want to stop right there. You could actually stop in the middle of a color by taking over with the foot control. If the machine is stitching on its own and you just touch the foot control and step on it and let go, like just tap it, it will stop the embroidery. And then you can take over with the foot control and embroider manually. So I do use this, especially for basting. It's very useful. You do not have to unplug the foot control at all. And actually, I think BERNINAs are among the only machines, if not the only machines, where you can embroider with the foot control. Now, most of the time it's the go button, the start-stop button. But again, for manual control over tricky areas, I can actually do this with the foot control. Okay, let's see here. Okay, the hand looks, somebody needs Choo-Choo, Choo-Choo Broomer from Canada. Yo, yo Canada, huh? Help with a hand look quilting stitch. So let me go there with the simulator. I'll just show you where it is. The simulator will show you that in the quilting menu, it's in the 1340s and 3047. Let me expand this using the flyout. And look, I have 3 hand look stitches. So the hand look stitch, it's very cool. It is a highly distorted stitch. You are violating every rule of good normal stitching for an effect, right? And people use this also for sashiko type work, where you can imitate the look of sashiko. Here's what a hand look stitch. It looks like a hand-picked quilting stitch, where the thread appears to disappear, for a while, then comes back, you have a stitch. It's because when you quilt manually by hand, you do this, up and over with a single thread, single needle. All right, so the hand look stitch. Your needle goes in. Typically, we use monofilament in the needle that will build a bungee effect or tension. We use high tension, like 8 or 9. And what you do is, after a few stitches, you use a 30 weight cotton thread, like Metler 30 weight cotton. That's a thick thread that will give you the hand look, the hand stitched look. What happens is the machine will take one stitch forward. That's just monofilament. Okay, then it takes a stitch backwards, but with that high tension, it's going to pull the bobbin thread, the heavy bobbin thread, up and form a loop on top of the fabric, and then take another stitch here, so nail it down. So now you have a double thread stitch that is, right from the hole that went backwards. Then when it goes forward again, it goes 2 stitches. So the first stitch is monofilament, that's invisible. The second stitch is an invisible, and on the third stitch and back, it will reproduce that pull. So it's yanking. The high tension monofilament on the top is yanking that heavy cotton thread back and over and nailing it before it moves, clears one gap, one stitch, then do it again. Okay, so that's what it is. So you had your tension at 9, which is great. You had your 40 and 80 weight thread. 80 weight thread may not work very well because we recommend a thicker thread for that. You may need to lower the tension a little bit on that. It may be too much. But the standard formula, the background formula, is 30 weight cotton thread in the bobbin, monofilament. I prefer the polyester monofilament. It's less prone to snapping, and it will resist an iron. If you ever put a hot iron to nylon monofilament, nylon melts at high temperature. So I prefer, for myself, the polyester monofilament because I have better results with it. I don't use it often, but then it's got a bit of an insurance policy built in for me. So that's for the hand look stitch. It's a highly distorted stitch for a very, very cool effect. Okay. All right. Let's see. We have Lydia Sorensen is asking, how do you combine stitches? Okay. Let me go to the web browser. So what you want to do, Lydia and everyone, make sure you do this. When these used to be available from your dealer only, but since COVID, we had to make things available online more, which is great for all of us users. You want to go to the BERNINA.com website, and under Learn and Create, there's Mastery Workbooks. When you go there, it will load the page where you have categories of workbooks, right? So you have sewing, quilting, and embroidery. That's your average domestic machine. Overlockers, long arm quilting, software, and Burnett. Wow, there's a whole bookshelf. So when you go to sewing, quilting, and embroidery, we are looking at combinations. That would be sewing, right? So when you open that, you're going to get this. This is the BERNINA sewing workbook, right? This is the date when it was last edited. And if you search down, I search for combi for combination. This is called combi mode. And then there it is, how to put it together on your machine. So all the steps are there. There's several pages of this. You'll be able to do lettering. For instance, if I drive you bananas, you will have to spell check that. How to fix lettering even, it's all in there. So make sure you download at least these 3, sewing, embroidery, and accessories, because that will help you take advantage of your equipment. Okay, so that answers Kim Marston's question as well, as how do you string letters together? That was in the same place. Your manual has information on this, but this is a little more details. It gets more practical. It's a workbook, not just a reference. Okay, all right. Chris Miller has a vintage BERNINA question. So how to make automatic buttonholes on an older BERNINA 1530? And we call them vintage because, a good vintage is a good wine, right? It just gets better with age. I have a 1260 BERNINA. That's my, that's the first generation of BERNINAs I ever owned, and I will always own that machine. There's a love relationship with that generation. I sold an 880, 790, my 830, but once in a while I take it out for a spin. If you want to do a buttonhole on all the machines up to the 1630, so from all the electronic machines, that would be the 1130 to the 1630, right? All that, you may see the word gamma kappa. that's a generation of those machines. Don't worry about the name. It's on the website. Actually, I saw it on the website last week. It's just the name of that generation of machines. So what you do is good old fashioned, like a tailor, you measure the length of the buttonhole you want on the fabric. You mark your start and end line. You could use a pin if you want, but you'll have to remove them. Or you use a chalk. I like the Choco liner, the little Choco liners, because you can brush those off. So you mark the beginning and the end of your buttonhole based on the size of button you have. If the card that you bought the buttons, or you have the exact millimeters of the buttons, use your little metric ruler. There's one on your machine. Add 2 millimeters to what the card said. That's the thickness of the button. The current computerized touchscreen machines do that for you when you put the button on screen. You can do that manually. So add the 2 millimeters. And then when you put your automatic buttonhole foot on, the old ones like my 1260 did not have the little slider, the red slider. That would have made it possible to add the 2 millimeters by just using the slider. But your old one is probably just a black foot. You mark the start, mark the end line. Start the buttonhole right there at the start line. So forward, it will do the first zigzag. When you reach the end line, don't stop shy of the line. Stop when you covered the line with one stitch, right? Stop there. Then tap the quick reverse button on the bottom front of your machine. Tap and release. No more. Resume sewing. The machine will go to the other side, the other bead, the right bead. It will go backwards. It will go back to the starting point, do the bar tack, zigzag forward, finish the bar tack, and lock it up. So that is, and then it's remembered. That is, the length is programmed in. If you came from an older generation of vintage Bernina like this, and you have a modern machine, you can still do buttonholes that way on the modern machine. So if you ever got a new machine from, let's say, 1530, you got a 570 QE or a 770, whatever. If you get a new machine, you say, oh my God, how do I do buttonholes? Because there's like 4 different ways to do it now, which is great. But you say, I need to make a buttonhole. I don't have time to learn how to do it. You can still do it the old method on the new machines. They did keep this, which is a brilliant idea. So it always works. All right, that's for buttonholes. And I bought my first Bernina 1090 because of buttonholes. And so I have a personal preference for Bernina buttonholes because they saved the shirts I was making back then. All right, I have okay, I have a 790 plus. Do I need to adjust tensions on the machine for machine embroidery? No. Good news. When you go to embroidery, that is calibrated in. The machine adjusts tensions, assuming your regular 40 weight embroidery thread, your regular bobbin, bobbin threads that we use and all that. Now, if you get creatives and you throw bigger or smaller crayons to your crayon box, you may have to tweak tensions, but it's on your touchscreen, just like when you're in sewing. And when you open the tension, let's go back to the simulator. I'm on the 880 now, but it's identical to the. It's identical. Well, actually, I should have said that. I would have to load a design and stitch it. When you go to embroidery, well, I'll stay here. You will have the same control here on the embroidery screen, and it will show you the tension up here. When you open this, you will get the very same dialog box here, where you can use the knobs and turn down and tweak your tension down or up according to what you're doing. And you can do this while the machine stitches. Now, I learned this from the sheriff. The sheriff laid down the law. I say this every time. There are 2 kinds of embroiderers, the ones who test and the ones who don't. If you have a design, a regular design that you bought online and is designed for regular thread and you want to get creative, use thinner, thicker thread for different effects, you'll have to test. Okay, you'll have to, and you may have to tweak tension when you do that. So it's nice and easy to do. You can do it while you stitch. Okay, all right. Okay, so Maureen Cole from the United Kingdom has a question. I have a Bernina 770 QE Quilters Edition, and I can't get the machine to show the foot I'm using on the display. Yes, the 777. Well, let me try that again. 770 QE Plus, the new one, has that feature now, the press a foot selection, where if you select a foot, you say, I have foot number 8D, Jean's foot with dual feed, right? If you select a foot, you tell the machine that's what's on, it will put on the screen right here, it would put the foot indicated. So if you go like this and you say, I have this foot on, and you say that's what I have, it would show on your computer screen, on your machine screen rather. So if you have a 770 QE regular, the way to do this is to purchase the upgrade. The upgrade will upgrade your sewing features, including press a foot selection, Because right now the original 770 QE only has pressure foot recommendation. It will recommend a foot that's suited for the stitch you've selected. But with the upgrade, you can now select the foot and tell the machine. Not only that, you'll get the BSR feature upgrades, and you'll get the embroidery feature upgrades as well. So you'll want to check that out. Personally, my teaching and learning philosophy is read the book, understand the book, and then throw the book away, right? Know what you cannot get away with. But this is where I am disciplined. Every time I change the plate or the foot, I tell my machines. Because late at night, I may not track that, oops, I still have this foot or that plate on, and I do it every single time. It's an insurance policy. And not only that, it will restrict some features on the machine that don't make sense once you activate a certain feature or put a certain foot on. So I like the machine to take care of me in return, so that works every time. So the upgrade to the 770 QE is your ticket there. We have a question from Louise Strickler from the US is asking, I would like to experiment with adjusting dual feed speed on my 880, and as shown on a program. So this is only on the 880, and well, the 830 had that feature, I believe, as well. When you do when you use the 880, if you have, let me go back here and let me choose this foot. Let's say I did overcasting, and I did some overcasting on the edge. If I want to use this feature with a dual feed, if your dual feed is, what Louise is saying, that the function is grayed out. Oops, go back here, go back here. The function may be grayed out if you don't have a D foot attached and the dual feed engaged. It has to make sense with the equipment on the machine and with the stitches selected as well. So that if you have a regular straight stitch, if you have a 1D foot, close this, and if you have I'm a regular stitch, I will go to the I functions, I go here. On the 8 series only, the 7 and 5 series that both have dual feed don't have this feature. This is a 8 series only. If you go into a positive number, your dual feed at the back of the foot, the dual feed is at the back of the foot, and it's helping with the feed dog, right? It's matching the back of the feed dog. And I did a video on dual feed versus walking foot, a webinar. It's recorded and it's on the BERNINA USA website. If you go to Learn and Create webinars, recorded webinars, it's there. And I showed on slow-mo that the teeth of the dual feed mesh intersperse, offset with the teeth of the feed dog. It's a really good grip on your fabric. But for that to work, it has to be all in place. And then when you use it this way, if you go to positive number with this function, the dual feed will actually go faster. So if you have a squishy fabric like polar fleece, you use dual feed, and sometimes you have 2 layers or 4 layers when you put a cuff together, and you realize you're top stitching, you're triple stitching, and your fleece is acting funny because when the foot is dragging on it, it's squishing down. So your stitching is end up diagonal a little bit because everything's being squished. By using the faster dual feed on the 8 series, by using this positive number that I showed on screen, you can have it say, you know what, you're going to rein in that fleece. You're not going to give it a chance to squish down and stretch forward. You're going to pull it out of the back, and it will stay put. My colleague, Debbie Ketchamani, uses this for quilt piecing. Again, only on the 880. She calls it the ultimate quilting machine. She will reduce the presser foot pressure. Let me show that. She reduces presser foot pressure to about half, 25. When that's done, straight stitch, you want your straight stitch to be a bit shorter. Mine, I piece at 175. You can piece a little bit of that. And she will increase the dual feed speed a little bit. And when you do your, we're back to the hands. I have a console switcher, and they have to watch whether I'm using, my hand is on the mouse, so I'm doing the puppet show. And Randy's getting pretty quick. All right, so when you have your cross seams, you butt your seam allowances. And I relearned something about that like a month ago, where when you butt your seam allowances, if your top layer has the seam allowances coming at you, raw edge coming at you, the presser foot, as it squishes everything down, which is its job, will keep those seam allowances butted, as opposed to the other way where they're prone to separating. Well, with this on and butting your seam allowances, they work perfectly every time without stretching your fabric. Even when you do half squares, if you own the bias, for instance, it doesn't really stretch your fabric by reducing the press of foot pressure. But then you compensate with that, and by using the enhanced dual feed, the 8 series is able to literally keep those together no matter what. So that's something I learned from my colleague Debbie. It's been very useful. Okay, let's see. We have 10 minutes left. Do we still have live questions coming in? Yeah. Well, actually, I'm going to do one from Australia. Let's go down under. All right. Michelle Adams from Australia is asking, I'd like to know how humidity affects the tension disc in my machines. Should the machines be always covered? Okay, humidity does not affect the metal, period, unless if I'm from Canada, and you come from outside, those of you in northern climes, you don't really experience that in Australia. You're more likely to have an oven level temperature than what we Canadians typically experience. But if you live in Minnesota, Maine, New England, anywhere where it gets cold in winter, don't keep your machine in the car all day if you're going to go to a class, or at least don't plan on sewing on that machine right away. The lubricants will be cold, and then if the machine is cold, it will condense, condensation will form. That could affect. Now back to Michelle. Humidity will not affect the machine itself. It may affect your thread and your fabric. If you're using cotton thread, and it's, here in the South in the United States, the temperature will go to 95 degrees in the summer and 105% humidity. So things get very, very humid, right? Then materials may not behave like they do if you are in air conditioning and everything. Your thread has never been outside and it's completely bone dry. So you may want to run I always run a quick test, a quick seam, no matter what project I do before I start sewing. Because again, it depends where your materials have been. But the only indication with this is if it gets condensation is from cold machines. If you plan on, if you have to go to work and go to class at night, the machine's going to be in the car, make sure that you get there early enough that your machine can come to room temperature. It's not a good idea to try to run everything when the lubricants are really, really cold. But for humidity itself, it's just a question of running samples, okay? I found there's more issues with very dry air. We had convention a few years ago in Phoenix. It's 80 degrees at 8 in the morning, 90 degrees at 9, and 100 degrees at 10. We did not need a thermometer. We just looked at the clock. Well, it was so dry that the thread, we were doing a little project, like little keychain, nylon webbing, and polyester isocord embroidery thread. You're talking synthetic on synthetic, static galore. We would get stitch loops. We had to re-oil the machines more often because it was so dry. And the thread being so dry was more prone to static, which is predictable. It's at the end of the drying cycle in your dryer that you will get that static discharge when you pull like a synthetic, polyester garment, right? So humidity itself is not a huge concern in warm climes. It's really dry air in hot climes and cold machines coming in, okay? We have Jill from the US asking, okay, I'm an experienced seamstress, but cannot seem to master the narrow hem feet. I'd love some tips. I did a video on foot 63 not too long ago. It's on Facebook, BERNINA USA. Look for hammer, and then in the videos, and it will come up. In November, I will be doing a video on the full set of hammers. Now, I won't show each one in detail because the video would be an hour long, but I will talk about all of them. But what I can tell you is, if you can, starch the fabric before you even cut it. And that was in my video that I did with number 63. That one goes around curves for like shirt hemming. It did two things. When you cut your final piece to shape, the little beards, the fabric won't fray because the starch is holding it in a little bit. And then it will roll better in the hammer itself. So, and if you don't want to spray, you want to just paint a bit of, let's say, best press right at the hemming edge. You can do this by, taking the liquid best press, pour into a little bowl, take a little sponge. Makeup sponges are good for that because they're pointed. I don't use them for makeup, but I use them for starch. Randy's laughing right now. Because those are sharp, you can use them to paint. Artists use them as well, right? You can paint right on at the edge where you could stabilize your edge that way. That would be the quickest thing. Next thing is, don't make the stitch too long. And remember that each hammer is rated for a certain thickness of fabric. So you make sure your scroll is big enough for the fabric you are using, and no hammers will do poly fleece. Okay, so that's for that. Lynn Taylor from the US is asking, oh wait, she's asking if this will be recorded. Emily, you want to answer that? And where will it be available? There you go. Let me show you where because this is not just me. All the webinars we do that get recorded get placed here. So from BERNINA USA, you go to Learn and Create, and then you go to let's see here, class webinars and events. So you go to BERNINA the webinars are here. Once you go to the webinars, and if like this is being held today, we take it offline because when the registration is closed. But then where are they recorded? There you go, recorded webinars. When you go there will be a list and they're categorized. So long arm, sewing, quilting, and so on. And there's a wealth. If you go to sewing, there's a bunch of them. Oh, who's that guy? So, there's a whole bunch of things there that you can take advantage of. Oh, look at that, dual feet or walking foot, convenience versus performance. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. So take advantage of it. We have about 5 minutes left. Do we have still more questions coming in?
Yes, Kathy would like to know, should we use the attachable table when embroidering on a 590 or 880?
Good question. Yes and no. Yes, anything large oval hoop or bigger, I use my table. The table is not there to support the embroidery, it's there to support the project, right? Anything, if it fits in the smaller medium hoop, typically, you can just drape it over the arm of the module and it's going to be fine. The small hoop only moves about 3 inches this way, right? But anything that's going to travel at, let's say roughly, not quite, but a 6x10 field or more, mega hoop, right? 5.9 by almost 16. Well, then that's going to travel. I'd like to support the project that way. It won't wiggle itself under. So, and this applies to the 7 and 8 series. Anything that is large oval hoop or bigger, I tend to use my table on my machine. Yes. Let's see here. That was. I ran a random number generator to pick up the rows in the table that I would use the questions. Okay, should you be able to stitch so this is Marilyn Darren from the US. Should you be able to stitch a decorative stitch on a quilt using a walking foot? Yes, but you're talking about a quilt sandwich, right? So low loft, on a high loft, it's not going to work very well. Low loft, yes. And then what you want to do is you may want to lengthen your stitch length a little bit just to open up that stitch so that it will bridge better. Because remember, when you sew with a straight stitch, we always say lengthen the stitch as the project gets thicker. So you may want to just, and you'll have to try on a scrap, but lengthen the stitch maybe 10, 20, 25% of the original stitch length. That way you might be able to, you should be able, now if it's a tiny little flower, it's not going to look like much, so your bigger stitches will probably look better. Okay. All right. So Annie Balm de la France is asking, silly question, there's no such thing. How to easily take the bobbin thread up on my new 590? I was tempted to answer this one in French, but for the public good, I'll do it in English. So what you do, your foot could be, usually my foot will be up when I do this because I want a visibility, or it even will be down. So, but I will use my freehand system. So with the foot up or down, I will hold the needle thread about 3-4 inches out. Hold it, and don't let it flop in. Just hold it. So there's a bit of tension on that thread. If your foot is down, there's full tension on that thread. Then the button on the front of your machine, the needle up and down button. Press that once, needle goes down, and then press it again, needle will come back up. If the foot is up, or you'll see you can pull your needle thread, and the bobbin thread will come right up. And then I'll pinch that and pull it out. If the foot is down, it may come through the foot, or if you've used a cutter, maybe a short tail, you may not see it much. So then I use the freehand system and lift my foot so I can get my fingers underneath and just pick that thread, and there you go. But either way, it's basically button, needle up and down. Then when it comes back up, pull your thread, foot up, pinch the thread, pull it. And if you cut them on the built-in thread cutter on the outside of the machine, then it will hold it for you until you're ready to sew. One more. I'm being told it's time, so one more. Let's see here. I'm looking for something that will have. Oh yes. So I don't think I've answered that one yet. If you get the spool, the needle thread warning when you start sewing, okay, That's because your thread was loose when you started. And that's because you probably started sewing before the fabric. Start like you need to be 1 millimeter on the fabric. Start on the fabric or hold your threads. Something has to anchor the threads when a steel hook is going to whack it at 1,000 times a minute, right? So that is usually what you'll get. If you're holding your threads, and if you get this while sewing, my reflex is cut the thread of the spool, rethread. If it does it, if it keeps doing it again, take your machine to your local store and have your tech look at it. You know, in a rare case, it could be your check spring that's inside your machine that is not flicking properly. It's a small little thing, but that's rare actually. So chances are when that happens to me, usually it's because I did not start on the fabric with, you know, where I should have held my threads, or it's threading. I may have been rushing when I threaded and there's a slack in my thread that would cause the check spring to not register fully because it needs to be under tension. The thread needs to have the right tension. So in that case, you will get that warning. So if it happens a lot and you think you're threading properly, take your machine to the store, have them do it for you. If it does it for them, then your tech can look at it. Chances are it's just a bit of slack in your thread, okay? And then one more. Okay, Helen Volt from Canada. What's the best foot we use with cork? Actually, pretty much any foot you want. Cork is not too clingy. It's not as bad as suede or leather or leatherette for that matter. But you could use number 52 or 52D, which is the the non-stick feet. Those work really, really well on the cork, even multiple layers. So that would be that's what I use typically. I have it for vinyl and other applications. So for anything that has a slight chance of clinging, I will use my non-stick foot with dual feet. In my case, 52D. There are non-stick feet available for machines that don't have dual feet as well. Okay, so that's the hour. Boy, it went fast.
It did.
So this will again will be recorded and it will be on the website. Let me point two resources before we part because those are very important. Make sure you go to BERNINAUSA.com because if you go to your machine there, you'll find out that you can get your manual. You put this on your large tablet like your iPad. You can the latest firmware. The question often is asked, well, how do I find out if there's a newer firmware? Your machine has that in the settings. You can go here and check whether your firmware is up to date. And you have also all the stuff available, the product questions, pressure feet, and so on. You also want to make sure that you bookmark wealso.com. WeAlso is your reference. There are tutorials, there are tips, there are project ideas. A lot of the projects are from outside bloggers whose job is to be on trend. So that, we have to be on task with the product. So we help you get the most out of your machine. They're free from that pretty much. They just basically use whatever's the current colors and fabrics and projects and so on. So there's a very good mix, a ton of material in there. There was a question, how do I properly thread my 8 series machine? They made me write a blog post on that. So there's a blog post on threading. If you just say threading 8 series, it will show, oh, look at that right there. So that will walk you through. I voiced over the animation built in your machine. There's a ton of blog posts with photography, very, very clear. YouTube, you'll want to subscribe to the BERNINA International channel. If you and it's basically youtube.com user BERNINA International, but if you just go to YouTube and at the top search for BERNINA, this will come up, and then you can go to the channel and then make sure you subscribe. If you choose the notifications, when we add videos on overlockers, quilting, long arm, anything, you will see those. I have a Roku streaming box at home on a 65-inch TV. That's my BERNINA YouTube viewer. I look at my BERNINA 880, it's like this big, right? I watch a lot of my sewing videos from BERNINA on my TV with my cat on my lap. So you can use this, you can view them on your phone anywhere you want to see YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. You'll be able to see what on your feed what is new and added. So that is for, and remember, BERNINA Facebook, make sure you follow the page. You will see the notifications. There are a bunch of videos, including edge-to-edge quilting with Connie Fanders. So you have a ton of resources available. And when in doubt, your best fall back on your feet option is call your local store. And then if you have to troubleshoot an issue, you want to know what foot will be good for this, bring the fabrics in, pay them a visit, and you can test drive the equipment or troubleshoot yours if you need, and just take a class on something you like to make that will help you take advantage of your machine better, because the staff at the store can help you really take advantage of your machine. So that's it for today. I hope that was helpful. I hope to do this again. I enjoy doing these. I'm a user, I was once a Bernina owner before I worked for Bernina. So having the information available, I know is very useful, and I'm all for it. So until next time, enjoy your sewing, enjoy your Berninas, and stitch along.
Thank you so much, Sylvain. I want to thank everybody for submitting your questions and having a wonderful hour with us. I just want to let you know that next month we have a wonderful two-part 880 plus webinar series. This will also pertain to your 830 owners as well. It'll be on bernina.com, the webinar section, in a few days to sign up for. So we hope to see you next month on our 880 webinar. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.